Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Giovanni Broussard, and I'm the Asia Pacific coordinator of the UNODC Global Program for Combating Wildlife and Forest Crime. Today, we are going to talk about the IQIC analytical toolkit and the indicator framework. And I will try to clarify how they can be used and how they can be rolled out in your country. Today's presentation will cover four specific topics, as you can see in this slide. The first topic that we're going to talk about is the IQIC. IQIC is the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. It was launched in November 2010, and it is an unprecedented partnership between five organizations: the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank, and the World Customs Organization. Recently, in November 2020, IQIC celebrated its 10 years anniversary. IQIC's mission is to support governments to strengthen criminal justice systems and to provide coordinated support at national, regional, and international level to combat wildlife and forest crimes. Two of the tools that we are going to discuss today, the analytical toolkit and the indicator framework, are tools developed in cooperation by the five members of IQIC. These tools were developed starting from the assumption that every country is confronted with different sets of challenges and problems in their response to wildlife crime. For instance, a country can be equipped with a solid legal framework to address wildlife crimes, but their ability to enforce the law is somewhat constrained by lack of manpower, training, and resources. Conversely, a country may be equipped with sufficient capability to investigate and prosecute wildlife crimes, but the legal framework lacks key provision to build strong cases in court or to address the organized crime dimension of the crime. Through the implementation of the toolkit and the indicator framework instead, it is possible to analyze in depth the specific strengths and weaknesses in a specific context, based on a standardized and peer-reviewed assessment methodology. The first tool that we will discuss today is the Wildlife and Forest Crime Analytical Toolkit, in short, the toolkit. The toolkit can be understood as a manual of instruction to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses in the way in which you are responding to wildlife and forest crimes. It is divided in five sections: legislation, enforcement, judiciary and prosecution, drivers and prevention, and data and analysis. For each section, the toolkit suggests what are the specific areas that you have to focus on to understand whether your government is responding effectively to the challenges of wildlife and forest crimes. The benefits of conducting an analysis based on the IQIC toolkit are multiple. First of all, through this analysis, you can identify the key areas that need to be strengthened to improve the national response to wildlife and forest crimes. Based on this analysis, you can develop a very context-specific and tailor-made action plan that aims at addressing those weaknesses that have been identified, or to support the strength of a response in the national context. That action plan can be the basis also to inform and develop national strategies, and can indicate where resources should be allocated, both human resources and financial resources, of course. It's a very useful tool for awareness raising, which, for instance, a ministry can use to create more awareness among other ministries that may not look at wildlife and forest crime as an important area of intervention. Lastly, the toolkit analysis can be a useful support to mobilize external support, technical and financial. And more often, the members of IQIC, when operating in different countries, are asking to develop the toolkit as the baseline from which developing further activities or roadmaps that can help making the external support more effective. The recommendations coming out from the toolkit analysis can be the basis for the development of an action plan. What you see on this slide is a template of an action plan developed in one of the countries where the toolkit was rolled out. Based on the recommendations identified, it is possible to determine what are the action required, the responsibility, and most importantly also the level of priority, high, medium, or low, associated to each recommendation. And it's also a useful tool to monitor progress. In particular, this action plan is a very useful instrument for resource mobilization, and it is therefore possible for governments to bring these action plans to potential donors and ask donors to fund or support technically or financially some of the areas identified in the action plan. The second tool that I would like to discuss today is the IQIC indicator framework for combating wildlife and forest crimes. In short, the indicator framework. As you can see from the cover page of this tool, the indicator framework is actually a self-assessment for national use, and I will explain now how it works. The indicator framework is a complementary tool to the toolkit. It can be rolled out in combination to the toolkit, or it can also be conducted as a standalone exercise. The indicator framework, as said previously, is a self-assessment. It means that it's based on a dialogue among the different law enforcement agencies in the country. The role of UNODC experts is one of external facilitation, but the results of the indicator framework are generally based on the discussion among the law enforcement agencies. Compared to the toolkit, the indicator framework has got a more specific focus on law enforcement, and it does so through 50 indicators that are divided over 8 outcomes. The indicator framework comes also with some guidelines that explain how to use this tool specifically in relation to the 50 indicators, and a template that can be used during a 2-day workshop in the country where the exercise is conducted. In the following slides, I'm going to explain more in detail how this tool can be conducted, and I will show some example of indicators. What you see in this slide is an example of 4 indicators as contained in the assessment template provided in the indicator framework. In practice, these 4 questions will be discussed among all the participants to the exercise, which generally include different law enforcement agencies, wildlife agencies, or authorities that are relevant to law enforcement in the fight against wildlife and forest crimes. The UNODC facilitator will explain the questions, will explain the possible answers, and will facilitate a discussion among the law enforcement agencies that will be then recorded in the comment section associated to each indicator. At the end of the exercise, each question will have a score based on the votes that the different law enforcement agencies or individuals in the law enforcement agencies have provided. With this slide, we zoom in a little bit further into specific indicators and the related answers. And this slide is useful to understand how actually in practice participants are supposed to cast their votes in relation to specific indicators. With this example, we see a question where we have 4 sets of answers: 0, 1, 2, and 3. Each answer is supported by specific explanations, and each participant is requested to tick those answers that in his or her opinion better match the reality. In this specific case, we see that the participant chooses 3 specific explanations under answer number 3. Therefore, the choice of the participant will be answer 3. There is also a box where participants are requested to provide comments, which will be very useful to provide useful context to those specific answers. Importantly, these indicators, each indicator is actually linked to the broader exercise of the analytical toolkit, as we can see from the top right circle in red in this slide, which indicates an alignment to the analytical toolkit. The next 3 slides will explain how in practice these tools can be implemented. As of January 2021, over 30 requests to implement the toolkit have been received by ICCWC. Implementation has been completed in 13 countries: Bangladesh, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Republic of Congo, Gabon, Lao PDR, Madagascar, Mexico, Mozambique, Nepal, Peru, Tanzania, and Vietnam. In other countries, the process is currently underway. Ladies and gentlemen, this slide is very important to understand how the toolkit and indicator framework processes can be rolled out in your country, from the very beginning to the very end. There are 7 specific steps that need to be observed. Step 1 is the request. The process of a toolkit or an indicator framework is launched with a formal request from the government to the CITES Secretariat or to UNODC. The government designates a government liaison point which will be in charge of the project. The CITES Secretariat or UNODC will respond to the official request of the government, and UNODC will coordinate the implementation process on behalf of ICCWC. The second step, the preparatory work, it's based on the fact that UNODC contacts the nominated government focal points to set up an introductory call to present the toolkit and indicator framework, its implementation process, and discuss the expectations of the government in terms of timelines and outcomes of the assessment. The third step is the initial meeting and the indicator framework workshop. The toolkit process is formally launched and presented to the government and relevant national stakeholders at an initial meeting to take place in the countries, where the toolkit is explained, the respective roles and responsibilities of the government and the ICCWC members are clarified, and a roadmap is designed. The meeting brings together high-level authorities and representatives of all relevant agencies that will be involved in the assessment. For instance, the forestry department, the wildlife departments, police, customs, rangers, judiciary, prosecution, and so on and so forth, as well as civil society, the donor community, and ICCWC partners organization. The high-level launch of the toolkit is generally followed by a 1 or 2 day workshop to undertake the ICCWC indicator framework national assessment. The result of the indicator framework will guide the broader toolkit analysis in the country and will serve as a baseline for future assessment. Step 4 is the in-country mission, a very crucial point of the toolkit process. The in-country mission lasts between 2 or 3 weeks, and its timeline is agreed with government during the initial meetings. The international experts that will be in the countries for 2-3 weeks are expected to collaborate with the government to obtain access to different sites and meetings with relevant authorities. Step 5 is the drafting of the reports and the action plan. After the international experts have left the country, a comprehensive report is drafted in close collaboration with ICCWC partners. The draft report is reviewed by the ICCWC partners and submitted to the government for its review and for raising questions or points of clarification or actual inaccuracies that the report needs to correct. While the full report remains confidential unless otherwise decided by the government, an executive summary is made publicly available. The report will include the annex, an action plan highlighting the findings and recommendations that potential actions and solutions will be prioritized as low, medium, or high designation. At this stage, the report needs to be fully endorsed by the government. And that's where we move to step 6, the presentation, where the endorsed report by the government is officially presented to the broad audience of stakeholders, specifically the government stakeholders. The presentation of the report and the action plan is organized together with the government, and it takes place in the country over the course of 1 or 2 days. Based on the action plan, initiate costing and mobilization of resources for the implementation of the action plan will start. The step 7, the last step, is the actual implementation of the recommendation and the action plan. At this point, it is clear what are the short, medium, and long-term priorities identified by the toolkit, and it's a government-led exercise where ICCWC members and other external parties provide support for the actual implementation. It is really important to clarify from the beginning what are the roles and responsibilities of all the parties involved in the toolkit and indicator framework exercises. After the process is agreed through an exchange of letters. Then the implementation of the toolkit starts. The role of UNODC and the rest of the IQIC partners is generally one of identifying the team of experts that will visit the country and will draft the report. UNODC will coordinate the overall process, will liaise with the national authorities, the focal points in the government, maintain the government always updated on the state of the process, will draft the toolkit report and the action plan, and will also engage with donors to mobilize the necessary resources for the implementation of the recommendations. The national counterparts, the government focal points, really needs to have an active participation throughout the consultative process. Needless to say that access to documents or facilities during the field visits and the interviews is provided exclusively by the government and the national counterparts. The government is also requested to review the draft reports that are submitted for analysis. And in close coordination with the focal point and UNODC, the government will organize also the presentation and the final launch of the toolkit and or the indicator framework. If you want more information or you actually want to download an electronic copy of the Wildlife and Forest Crime Analytical Toolkit or the IQIC Indicator Framework, please visit the IQIC portal in the CITES website at the address included in this slide. I hope that you found this presentation useful. For any further doubts or question, please do not hesitate to contact UNODC and all IQIC members. I thank you for the attention and I wish you good luck for the rollout of the IQIC Indicator Framework and Analytical Toolkit. Thank you.